Good evening. It's 7 o'clock on Friday the 30th of April, and this is Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this evening I'm presenting the programme from Edinburgh. I'm delighted to say that we're joined this evening by Paul McLennan. Paul is the SNP's candidate for East Lothian in the Holyrood election. He has been an SNP councillor for 14 years and was also a previous council leader. Paul has also been a board member of NHS Lothian, a regional advisory board member of Scottish Enterprise, and a member of the Commission on School Reform. He currently works in strategic communications. Hello, Paul. How are you this evening?
Good evening. A little bit leg weary and a little bit red in the face after being out campaigning all day. Apart from that, very good.
Excellent. Whereabouts in East Lothian have you been campaigning today?
I was in Gifford today, just near Haddington. Lovely part of the country, and it was good to see people out about in Gifford as well. So enjoying the sunshine and being able to see the shops open again and businesses being open again. So it's good to see.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. First of all, we have the daily coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 1,917,236 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,691,184 have been confirmed negative, and 226,052 have tested positive. There are 191 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,659. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 67 were in hospital last night, 9 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. today, 2,802,152 people have had their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 1,224,861 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,517 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. That's an increase of 15 since yesterday. That number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. Our first news story this evening is the crush at an Israeli religious festival which has killed at least 45 people. They were crushed to death overnight at a crowded religious festival in Israel, with some asphyxiated or trampled victims going unnoticed until the PA system sounded an appeal to disperse. Tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews had thronged to the Galilee tomb of the 2nd century sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai for the annual Lag Boimer commemorations that include all-night prayer, mystical songs and dance. Witnesses said that many of the dead were caught in a tightly packed passageway around 3 metres wide after crowds packed the slopes of Mount Menon in northern Israel in defiance of warnings to maintain social distancing against COVID-19. Medics said there had been a stampede in the men's section of the gender-segregated festival, and casualties included children. Many of the dead have yet to be identified, and police asked family members to provide pictures and personal information of those who attended the festival and were still missing to help with the process. Videos posted on social media showed ultra-Orthodox men clambering desperately through gaps in sheets of torn corrugated iron to escape the crush. Bodies lay in stretchers in a corridor, covered in foil blankets. Our thoughts are, of course, with all of those who have lost loved ones in this tragedy in Israel. Paul, firstly, what is your reaction to the news overnight from northern Israel?
Andrew, I think it's obviously tragic. I know the event last year wasn't held because of COVID restrictions, and I think there was probably a bigger crowd than the authorities had estimated. And our thoughts and prayers are obviously with the families and with the Israeli state tonight. And there'll be many people who won't have loved ones in what's been a really tough year anyway. So our thoughts and prayers are with the families that have been affected.
It's a good point that you make, Paul, regarding the events not having taken place during 2020. Do you think that as we follow the path out of the COVID lockdown, people's exuberance at being unlocked is going to become a problem for event organisers?
I think that's something I think we're going to have to bear in mind. And I think obviously people of faith have obviously missed religious festivals as well. I know there were similar issues, possibly as part of the COVID upsurge in India when there was religious festivals just a week or two ago. So I think authorities are going to have to be very careful as we move out of COVID throughout the world, and people will, as I said, move back to the religious festivals that they've possibly missed in the last year or so. So I think it's something we have to be very cautious about going forward, and in that level in the next year, but also as we approach summertime, we have the likes of the Edinburgh Festival and so on, and concerts that are planned throughout the year as well. So I think it's almost looking at these step by step and making sure that obviously safety is paramount, but obviously anything to do to try and stop any upsurge of COVID also.
Thanks, Paul. We'll move on to the Scottish election. And Nicola Sturgeon says only the SNP has a plan to protect Scotland's NHS. Nicola Sturgeon today urged people across Scotland to unite behind the SNP to protect Scotland's NHS, and she warned that the threat of Tory austerity is staring us in the face. Campaigning in Edinburgh today, Ms Sturgeon highlighted that the SNP is the only party setting out detailed plans for the first 100 days in office. She said that it is only a vote for the SNP on the 6th of May that will deliver a recovery for the Scottish NHS and Scotland's economy. The SNP plans include offering a COVID vaccine to every adult by the end of July or earlier if supplies allow, delivering an NHS pay rise within the first 100 days, opening new fast-track cancer centres by the end of May, beginning the work for a national care service, and taking the first steps to remove NHS dental charges. The First Minister urged voters to back the SNP with both votes to ensure a strong SNP government that can get down to business and keep Scotland safe from Tory cuts. Paul, firstly, is there anything new in this statement today, or is it a repetition of some things that we have heard at the beginning of the campaign?
I think what's really impressed me during the course of this campaign is the SNP have come out in terms of their manifesto commitments, and have a much more detailed manifesto than other parties. The NHS has always been one of the most important issues for voters are out there, and we've picked it up on through either virtual meetings we've had or the limited time we've had knocking doors and speaking to people. So people, I think, have seen the commitment the SNP has to the NHS, and I think we've seen that through poll after poll after poll. Who's trusted to look after the services, and I think the SNP come out on top of that. For example, in my own constituency, we're talking about more services in the newly built East Lothian Community Hospital, which is very important. The NHS pay rise, I think, politics is all about choices, and the Scottish Government chose to give a pay rise of 4%. Down in the UK Government, they've talked about 1%. So I think that's obviously something that goes out and values the NHS after a year, a very hard year. And the dental charges, again, I think is something that's well welcomed, and particularly, when we look at the number of people who don't go to the dentist because they simply can't afford it, that then comes at a cost, later on if people need emergency dental treatment or other dental treatment. And of course, the thing I think around about dental treatment as well is dental treatment also picks up on other issues such as mouth cancer and so on. So I think that's a really important policy that's come out, and it's going down well on the doorsteps for ourselves. And it's obviously been an important part of the campaign. And when voters are asked what's one of the most important issues for this campaign, the NHS comes through time and time again.
You've beaten me to my next question there. I was going to ask you firstly, which of these Scottish NHS campaign commitments or others were playing best on the pavements? Is it the plan to remove dental charges that voters are talking to you about?
Yeah, that's been raised, and I suppose East Lothian, it's a microcosm of Scotland, if you like, and there are different parts of East Lothian, for example, it's suffer in areas of multiple deprivation, and that tends to affect people's health. If they're not getting the free dentistry as well, and so that's gone down well in various parts of the country. The other thing, Andrew, I think it's really important that's came through, and I was on a carers husting just a week or two ago, and the National Care Service was something that's been very warmly welcomed. The removal of non-residential charging as well is something that's been very much welcomed as well. So overall, if you're talking about the NHS and obviously carers as well, they go hand in hand, and I think that's a strong commitment, I think, in our manifesto to improve that. And obviously there's going to be the recovery from COVID, which is going to take quite a while. But I think the First Minister's mentioned in our first 100 days of being re-elected, it's going to be a key focus for the party.
It's a good point that you make, Paul. We've touched on this programme, we've touched a few times on the interconnectedness or the intersectionality between different elements in the SNP's manifesto. And you're mentioning there that an increased uptake of dental services will help in the identification and treatment of mouth cancer and other cancers. And at the same time, there is this commitment to open new fast-track cancer centres for cancer treatment, starting at the end of May. Similarly, that the National Care Service will assist families, will assist those in care, but it will also assist the families of those in care who are having to balance both financial and time commitments to bringing up families and caring for those who need care. Do you think there was a deliberate intention to lay out that sort of matrix approach in the manifesto?
Very much so. Obviously, I think there are a lot of policies, whether it's in care or NHS, which are very much linked. And we had the integrated joint boards, which have come into local authorities in the last number of years, and I think that's taken a step forward. How we look after our ageing population, and we need to do more in that regard and integrate more services as we go forward. And I think we're talking about the National Care Service. It's looking obviously at conditions. It's looking at pay, and I think there needs to be a minimum wage for carers as well in that regard. So I think very much so that it's the policies are very much linked, and I welcome that. And if you're talking around about how we tackle attainment issues and poverty issues, the general health of our population is a massive part of that also.
Absolutely, and it's an interesting point that you make also with regard to a minimum wage for those working in the care sector. Do you think that has arisen simply as a result of our experience during 2020 with COVID, with the commitment and hard work of those working in the care sector, or do you think was it always in the background as a plan to be unveiled in due course at some point?
I think it's a bit of both, Andrew. I think obviously there's recognition that how much the care sector has helped in the last year or so, and will continue to do so. But there are issues, for example, again coming back to my own constituency, and I know in other parts of Scotland, where it's hard to recruit carers, particularly in rural parts. And to be honest, some care agencies could probably offer the same wage as somebody could go and work in a supermarket. So, obviously paying a minimum wage for carers, I think, is a step towards it. And I think there are also opportunities as well to see care as a career opportunity, and develop that. And I think that has to go hand in hand. And I think the enhanced conditions for people who work in the carer industry and enhanced pay, I think, will make caring, I think, more of a career rather than just, very much a short-term job where people come in, stay for 6 months and leave. And that can impact on people who they look after, because I think what's really important is people who require the care need that stability. They don't need 3-4 people a year changing having spoken to families about this in the past, that's something that is really welcome, is the stability that they would have with a regular carer.
Thanks, Paul. That's a really useful insight. Also in the Scottish election, the Scottish Greens have described a vision for a bold climate action plan. The Scottish Greens have today marked the final week of the election campaign with a warning on the urgency of the climate emergency. Co-leaders Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater highlighted that with less than 10 years before the deadline set by the Paris Agreement to keep global warming down, the time to vote Green is now. Speaking to journalists across the Clyde from the SEC, which will host November's global COP26 climate summit, co-leader Patrick Harvie said that we need urgent action on the climate emergency if we are going to secure our survival, and this election will be the last where we can still make a significant policy shift to a low-carbon economy. Lorna Slater said, "A vote for the Scottish Greens is a vote for investment in a green recovery that can reduce Scotland's carbon emissions and build a fairer, greener economy. Scotland can lead European efforts to tackle the climate emergency as an independent nation." Now, Paul, I think it's fair to say that this message is received loud and clear by younger voters, but are you finding that it's cutting through at all with older voters too?
Yeah, very much so. I think you're right, and in terms of the younger voters, I think it's probably the most important issue. I would say, and we've been helped very much so by the Young Scots for Independence, and produced a video on that, and it came across very well. When we were speaking to younger voters, I think there's more of a recognition now around about the issues around about climate emergency, and it certainly has come up on the doorsteps and been asked about it quite a bit. And I think we have an ideal opportunity with the COP coming to Glasgow this year, about putting Scotland on the map, and highlighting the issues that are out there and what we need to do as a country. And I think the Greens are right. We would have more ability to do that as an independent nation. But I think the SNP record and what we've achieved so far is encouraging, and the manifesto itself, I think, is encouraging as we go forward. But there's a lot of work still needing to be done, I think, generally across Scotland to make people aware of the level of the climate emergency that we face.
You mentioned earlier on, Paul, that in a way East Lothian is Scotland in microcosm, and of course East Lothian still has one power station, albeit a nuclear one. So there are a number of aspects to the green agenda, not one of which also is employment and skilled employment. Undoubtedly, the engineering roles at Torness are highly skilled jobs. Now, the move to removing nuclear energy and moving to renewables is policy for a number of parties. How do you think that will play out in East Lothian?
It's very relevant in East Lothian. Torness is in my council board. I live about 5 to 10 miles away from it, so it's an issue that's always been raised during council elections, and Torness has probably got around about 8 or 9 years on its natural life that's left, and obviously there would be defueling and decommissioning after that, so there'd be a period of work going on after that. But I think that we need to look at green jobs. We need to work more closely with our universities and our colleges to look at that and make sure that there are careers in that regard, but also in the wider environment. What was interesting for myself on Monday is that First Minister and I visited the Seabird Centre in North Berwick, and it attracts 200,000 visitors a year. And one of we were speaking to the chief executive, and what she said, they see more of a role not just in obviously as a tourism attraction, but also trying to get the environmental message out there and seeing it as a career. So they're talking very much with the colleges and universities around about that, talking about marine biology and opportunities around about that. So there's a role, and I think of the third sector as well, and tourist organisations to try and do that. And the Seabird Centre were very keen on that. And I think we've done very well in terms of the green jobs, but we need to do more, and in particular about renewable energy and the opportunities around about that.
Of course, thank you. Now, elsewhere in the election, Anna Sarwar has been criticised for evading questions on the key issues facing Scotland, with polls today showing that, despite the sleaze surrounding the Tories, Labour are completely failing to have an impact. The SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said Scotland needed experienced leadership that could stand up to the Tories and protect Scotland from Westminster cuts, not politicians or parties that sit on the fence. Anna Sarwar has faced criticism for evading questions on Labour's position on a number of key issues at this election, including the Tory attacks on the powers of the Scottish Parliament and plans for more austerity, cuts to universal credit, backed by Labour in Westminster, who have said that they won't argue for the continuation of the £20 uplift on universal credit, Labour's position in relation to drug deaths in Scotland, the removal of nuclear weapons from Scotland, the devolution of more powers to Scotland, for example employment law, that he had previously vetoed, and the democratic right of the people of Scotland to choose their own future. SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "We can see from Westminster that Labour are completely unable to stand up to the Tories and to keep Scotland safe. The Tories in Westminster are doing whatever they like, and Labour simply are not doing anything to stop them." So, Paul, firstly, what are your thoughts on the performance of Anna Sarwar so far through this election?
I think probably in hustings he's came across reasonably well, and I think polls have shown that. But Andrew, what it reminds me is of during the 2010 election, you had Nick Clegg, and you remember the famous saying, "I agree with Nick, I agree with Nick, I agree with Nick." And then obviously during the next year or two, his popularity waned. And I think when you see Anna Sarwar at the moment, it's very much within the microcosm of he wants to come second. He knows he can't win the election. He's already come out and said that. The battle buses is talking about second votes, so he's not even after constituency votes. And I think after the election, he will be asked, he will have to answer these questions. And in the recent hustings, we were asked a question around about if the majority of people in Scotland vote for a referendum, should they have that? And all we had from all three candidates, including the Labour candidate, was, "I'm against independence." That wasn't the point. It was asking whether, if the majority of people in Scotland wanted a referendum, should they have it? Of course they should have. And I think that's where Anna Sarwar and his parliamentary colleagues are sitting on the fence with regarding this. They've also we've had issues raised about Brexit, for example, and Labour have said they won't go back in. We've asked, do they agree with that? And on a local basis, didn't come out, no comment. And our food and drink industry in East Lothian has been damaged, permanently, I think. And I've seen that in various parts of Scotland. And I think it's very much the microcosm within the election. I think after that, there will be more of a focus on the Labour Party and what they have to say to people in Scotland. It's very much within the microcosm at the moment, I think, of the Scottish general election. Beyond that, I think you probably go down the same road as Nick Clegg went, and I think people will see him for what he is. We've seen an example, Andrew, for example, with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer started very well, and people seen him almost as in the middle of the road, and his popularity was quite high. Now he's less popular than Boris Johnson as an ex-Prime Minister down in the UK. So I think very much you'll see the same road for Anna Sarwar.
I was just going to mention Sir Keir Starmer. I was going to ask you, how do you think that the fence sitting, a tactic that started under Jeremy Corbyn and has continued under Keir Starmer, how's that playing with voters in Scotland?
I don't think it's going down very well, and his name doesn't come up on the doorsteps that often. But I think, if you see a stronger UK Labour Party, I think it maybe give confidence to a stronger Scottish Labour Party, and so his name doesn't come up very much. And I think in terms of the discussions we have around about independence, and sometimes you get feedback from Labour Party members or Labour Party supporters saying, Labour Party will win down south again and it'll all change, and it won't. You've seen poll after poll after poll. It'll show that the Tories controlling the polls and possibly winning the next election, probably winning the election, and possibly the win after that. So it comes home. I think how Keir Starmer performs is relevant to how the Scottish Labour Party performs and how people see the future in the UK.
It's a good point you make, Paul, and I was reflecting just before you came onto the programme. The folks may not appreciate that East Lothian returned Labour MPs for decades, largely as a result, I would think, of the heavy industry and the coal mining along the coast, where the population was concentrated, and of course would be rock solid, weigh the Labour vote rather than count it territory. And that it's changed so much in the last 2 or 3 decades says a great deal. You've mentioned a little bit of feedback from Labour voters. Are voters on the streets of East Lothian saying anything much about the new Labour of British Labour in Scotland?
Not really. As I think when it's come up, it is around about what you debate. Obviously, is saying that do we really want to be controlled by Boris Johnson? Do we want to be controlled by the UK Conservative Party for the next 3 years before the next election, and possibly another 5 after that? And you're saying to people you're facing another 8-10 years of Tory austerity. You're facing 10 years of for me, quite frankly, a foreign policy which is disgusting in that regard, and that's a kind of debate that we've had around about that. So it's not so much on Keir Starmer himself, but more on broader UK politics and the future of the Labour Party, the future prospects of the Labour Party winning another election in the next 1 or 2 terms. That does come up.
Thanks, Paul. Switching to Westminster now, Ian Blackford MP has called for the Prime Minister's COVID contracts correspondence to be published. The SNP leader at Westminster has urged the UK government's newly appointed independent advisor on ministers' interests to urgently investigate the Prime Minister's correspondence on COVID contracts before Boris Johnson disposes of his mobile phone. In a letter to Lord Geidt, Ian Blackford said publishing such correspondence should be an urgent priority, given the mounting allegations of breaches of the ministerial code of conduct and the risk that evidence could go missing. The letter from Ian Blackford follows his exchange with Boris Johnson during Prime Minister's questions on 21st April, when Mr Johnson gave a commitment to immediately publish all his private correspondence relating to COVID contracts. 9 days later, the Prime Minister is yet to make the correspondence public. The exchange at Prime Minister's questions followed media revelations regarding Boris Johnson's private correspondence with Sir James Dyson and Johnson's commitment to fix a tax break for the billionaire and some of his staff. So, Paul, focusing on the questionable COVID contracts first, in the absence of any meaningful commitment from Downing Street to a public inquiry into the pandemic, what do you think the chances are that Ian Blackford's demands for publication of the correspondence will be met?
For me, it's not a party political issue, and I think it's all about upholding the standards in the Parliament. I would like to think that this would be backed by the other parties. I'd like to think it would be backed by the Conservative Party themselves. I have severe doubts that it will be, and I think upholding standards in public life is vitally important in how we see politics. I don't think the party will back it, and I think it kind of comes in almost to a pattern. We talked about, I think, the importance. The First Minister mentioned before about the response to COVID and talked about a 4-nation response and an inquiry into that, and the UK government have knocked that back. And we just have to look at the whole issue around about the inquiry with the First Minister and Alex Salmond. And, the UK press was all over that. It was headline news for weeks and months and so on. So, and I think, if we're upholding that, then we have to look about what's going down in the UK Parliament and the UK government just now. And there needs to be a full public inquiry, no doubt about that. All the parties should be combining on that and making sure that happens. And particularly Boris Johnson. One of the key things, I think, when we talked about the First Minister, is she self-referred herself in regards to the inquiry. And I think that's where we've seen that come through. I very much doubt you will see Boris Johnson doing the same thing and the UK government backing that. So I think it damages politics. I think it will damage the UK government. But do they care? I don't think so.
That's an interesting question. I was going to turn to the Prime Minister's mobile phone It's been reported today that the number of that phone has been publicly available since about 2006. Do you think that Boris Johnson's approach to security, and indicated by his not caring much about his mobile phone, do you think that indicates that he doesn't understand the implications, or that he thinks he's untouchable, or that he just doesn't care?
I think all three, Andrew. I think all three, and I think his time in the Foreign Office demonstrated that as well. I remember watching a documentary on his time in the Foreign Office, and I think, how he was thought of in the Foreign Office was, wasn't very well respected. He didn't know his subject matter very well, didn't care about much what the implications of some decisions that he made were about. So, and you're right, I think there's a lot of times he doesn't understand the subject matter. You can see that at PMQs. He doesn't understand the subject matter, and I don't think he has a grasp of detail, which I think is important. And there is that element, I think, just of arrogance. He doesn't care. He stabbed colleagues in the back to get to the position he was as Prime Minister, and I don't think he actually cares anything about what people think of him. I think he thinks it's a God-given right that he's the Prime Minister, and he's a God-given right to anything that he does, is acceptable. I think it will damage him. It will damage the Conservative Party. But to a certain extent, however, we've seen the polls last week and this week where it's the Tories are increasing their lead. But it doesn't do politics well at all.
Of course. Staying at Westminster, nearly 200 groups have criticised the UK government consultation on refugee policy. They have branded a government consultation on fundamental changes to refugee policy a sham. A total of 192 refugee, human rights, legal and faith groups have signed a public statement condemning the 6-week consultation on the government's new plan for immigration as vague, unworkable, cruel and potentially unlawful. The Home Office states that the consultation, which ends on 6th of May, is about plans to make the asylum and immigration systems fairer and more efficient, to deter illegal entry, and to enable the government to more easily remove people they say have no right to be in the UK. The signatories of the public statement include Refugee Action, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, Asylum Matters, the Scottish Refugee Council, Detention Action, and Freedom from Torture. They have raised concerns about the sweeping changes planned by the Home Secretary Priti Patel, including deporting people to third countries, holding refugees in warehouse-style reception centres, and forcing people to reapply for asylum protection every 30 months. The signatories say the consultation is poorly designed, confusing, and inaccessible, and add that it gives organisations fewer than 6 working weeks to respond to a process for which 3 months or more is usual. There are no questions in the consultation which ask people about their personal experiences of fleeing persecution or seeking safety in the United Kingdom. The consultation is only available in English and Welsh, and most easily accessible online, factors that could further exclude refugees from responding. So, Paul, as the child of a Gujarati family who fled from Uganda to London in the 1960s, why do you think Priti Patel makes such a show of being so anti-asylum seeker and anti-immigrant?
Andrew, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I don't get, I don't understand why she comes out with the lines that she's coming out. But I think it follows a long line of Home Secretaries and Foreign Secretaries and Prime Ministers who quite frankly have, their actions on dealing with this matter is disgusting. You remember the time when Theresa May was Home Secretary, they had the vans going round and demonising immigrants, and I think that was terrible. Only this week we've seen dawn raids in Glasgow, and I think for myself, it's one of the main reasons about supporting independence. It's how we look after our most vulnerable people, and whether that's UK foreign policy, for example, which I'd mentioned earlier on, but the policy on immigration, frankly, is disgusting. If the Scottish Government looked after immigration, there would be no way we would have a policy like this. So, and just, again, this is coming from a political point of view, but you mentioned about the number of groups that have fed back on this. Um, all the groups that are involved in this, don't understand why the UK government's doing this. Are frankly very much against it, and you're almost seeing Trump-like policies. You mentioned about the deportation centres, but actually deporting people to third countries, it's almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievably cruel. And many, and I'll be frank, many issues we've had with immigration have been caused by issues that the UK government over a number of years, and UK foreign policy over a number of years, have created wars and issues that have kept on going for years upon years upon years. And yet, when people come across desperately requiring help, we treat them like this. It's disgusting. It's frankly disgusting.
That's an interesting point that you make, Paul. It having been suggested that Patel considered warehousing and processing asylum seekers in the Falklands, or Ascension, or Gibraltar, and that she was interested in a wave machine in the English Channel pointed at the coast of France. And earlier this morning, I was watching the flight path of the Border Force drone patrolling up and down the English Channel looking for people. Given the size of the Tory majority and the lurch to the right in Tory politics over the last 10 years, do you think that there's any limit to what she will try and do?
No, I think this obviously started with part of the discussion around about Brexit and the language that was used by the Leave campaign and the Tories around about that time, talking around about that, and that's continued. I think that they'll be buoyed, obviously, by the opinion polls, and I suppose the prospect of another Conservative government, whether it's in 2023 or 2024, depending on when Boris Johnson calls that election. I think they see themselves as untouchable, and they're backed up by the general public in that regard. And again, as I said, it comes down. This is one of the main reasons that Scotland should have its independence. It can look at its own immigration policy and how we deal with immigrants, and how we can also, on a slightly different matter, how we can attract people to the country. And I think the foreign policy that UK has at the moment has stopped people coming into UK. It's had an effect on Scotland as well, because it's not seen as welcoming. And I want Scotland to be seen as an outward-looking country where we can welcome people from all parts of the world, whether it's through war or whether they just want to come and start a new life in Scotland.
Absolutely, thank you. In other news, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts has suspended actor and filmmaker Noel Clarke after the Guardian newspaper reported he had been accused of groping, harassment and bullying by 20 women. Mr. Clarke, 45, denied any sexual misconduct or wrongdoing and said he would defend himself against the false allegations. The Guardian said it had spoken to 20 women who accused Noel Clarke of sexual harassment, unwanted touching or groping, sexually inappropriate behaviour and comments on set, professional misconduct, taking and sharing sexually explicit pictures and videos without consent, and bullying between 2004 and 2019. BAFTA said in a statement, "In light of the allegations of serious misconduct regarding Noel Clarke in The Guardian, BAFTA has taken the decision to suspend his membership and the Outstanding British Contribution to Cinema Award immediately and until further notice." In a statement, Noel Clarke said, "In a 20-year career, I have put inclusivity and diversity at the forefront of my work and never had a complaint made against me. If anyone who has worked with me has ever felt uncomfortable or disrespected, I sincerely apologise." Now, Paul, you work in strategic communications nowadays. What do you think Noel Clarke's advisors are counselling him today?
I think he's just come out recently, just in the last hour or so, and apologised, I think, for some of his behaviour, but has again came out and denied some of the accusations, and I think he needs to be honest with people, and if that's the case, I think there's a long way back for him now in that regard, and I think in terms of where he is, he needs to be honest. And I think it looks like he's made these mistakes. 20 women have come out and said that. He needs to be honest with people, and I think he'd said tonight that he's going to go out and get treatment for that. And I think that's the first step forward, is acknowledging that he has that problem. But it looks at the much broader issues that we still face in life today, and women shouldn't be treated like that. it's still ridiculous at this stage, in 2021, that women, and whether it's in a workplace, whether it's in, going out, or whether it's just normally walking the street, that women are subjected to this. And we've seen that in the murder case down in London, and women shouldn't have to feel like that. I watched a documentary in the Yorkshire Ripper a number of years ago where women had to come out and march in the streets to protect themselves. Now, 30, 40 years ago, we're still facing this same situation in that regard. So I know Noel Clarke's issue isn't really as serious a matter, obviously, as the murder case that we had recently, but it's indicative about how some men still see the way that they can treat women as acceptable. It can't go on. We have to continue to make sure that particularly that younger men are educated as they go forward, and that's through families, that's through schools, and I think that's something that we need to continue to work to and look at even more about how we get that across, because it's unacceptable. Women shouldn't have to feel like that in 2021, not in any time, but not in 2021. It's unacceptable.
There are similar matters being considered on the other side of the planet today as well. The Australian Prime Minister has met with a former government employee who alleges rape in the Australian Parliament House. Prime Minister Scott Morrison today met with a former government staffer who alleges that she was raped by an unnamed colleague while working in Parliament, as Australia's government faces mounting public anger over its handling of the complaint. Brittany Higgins, who filed a police complaint in March over the alleged rape in 2019, described the meeting with Morrison as difficult, while Morrison said he was pleased to hear her views on how to make Parliament a safer workplace. Morrison has struggled to placate public anger amid several allegations of sexual abuse, discrimination against women, and misconduct in Parliament in recent months. Tens of thousands of women protested across Australia in March to demand gender equality and justice for victims of sexual assault. The Prime Minister acknowledged that the system had let me down, and we were in agreement that there needs to be reform, Ms Higgins told reporters in Sydney. Earlier this year, Ms Higgins said that she was raped in Parliament by an unnamed male colleague in 2019 while she worked as a media advisor to the then Defence Industry Minister, Linda Reynolds. She told local media she was pressured at the time not to make an official complaint, but Linda Reynolds has denied that allegation. Paul, do you think that there are lessons here for politicians and governments around the world?
Very much so, and I think one of the things that we've seen come out of the Salmond affair was obviously the Scottish Parliament and how that dealt with any complaints of inappropriate behaviour, sexual behaviour, and I think that needs to be, every Parliament should be looking at that. There should be the code of conduct that every politician should face, particularly politicians, and it's not just politicians, but particular people that have been elected into office, that there's a strict code of conduct, be that through council, be that through MPs, MSPs. There has to be an open forum where men and women who have been, abused or had inappropriate behaviour upon them. I think there needs to be a clear, transparent system in place to make sure people know they have somewhere to go. And I think that's one of the first things. I think we then need to look at the broader message that politicians send out, and Scott Morrison, I think, is not sending out a strong message to do that. There should be, there shouldn't be any doubts on how that's been dealt with, and I think that the clear message needs to go out from people in high office that behaviour like that's unacceptable. Because if women don't feel they can come forward, and if they do come forward, they don't feel that they're being listened to at the highest office, more women will sit back. All men, as I said, it's not just women, there's a small number of men. I think, they'll sit back and they'll have to live with that. And it would be something that's very, very hard to do. Beyond that, obviously, we need to look about how the cases that do come forward, how they are prosecuted. And in terms of, I suppose, rape cases, how can we make that as easy as possible for women to give evidence? And how can we make sure that the trials are fair, but also increase, I suppose, the conviction rates, which are very low across the world at the moment?
Yeah. Ms Higgins said that Scott Morrison acknowledged that the system had let her down. Do you think that is in any way a good enough response? It sounds to me like the kind of non-apology that Priti Patel would make.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear, you've heard time and time again, it's a system, or they have let me down, kind of stuff. That's not, that's, he can't come out and say that. As politicians, whether it's been, whether it's in administration or not, politicians have have the ability to change things, to bring forward legislation, to prioritise, to listen to people in that regard. And we've heard about whether it's sexual abuse or any other forms of abuse in that regard for a number of years. So to say that the system's let him down, he's part of that system. So he's responsible for it. So no, that for me is very much a non-apology, as you said. If it wasn't me, it was somebody else before me, kind of stuff. That's not acceptable.
And thinking of politicians, and Australian politicians perhaps in particular, do you think that there's much chance that Scott Morrison will deliver cultural change in the Australian Parliament and protect political staffers against predatory behaviour in their workplace?
I would like to think so. That if you look at his approach to policy and to politics generally, and how he deals with people and works with people, I would very much doubt it. And I think if there was going to be an opportunity to come out and be sincere, he's known about the issue for a period of time. He could have made some announcement today to look at that in a little bit more detail. As you said, it's very much a non-apology. And if you're the complainant, you're walking away going, okay, what have I got out of today? What's going to happen next? Not a lot, but from what I'm picking up, and I would be concerned, and again, this is where I think society in Australia and generally, need to be asking more of the politicians. We can't have that.
Thanks, Paul. Now, back in Scotland, an Extinction Rebellion have blockaded the Faslane nuclear submarine base. Extinction Rebellion Scotland has staged a protest at the north gate of the Faslane base this morning. An all-female group attached themselves to 3 plant pots painted with the words safe, green and future on the road. Police arrived at the scene at 6:20 this morning after Police Scotland became aware of the incident. HMNB Clyde is the Royal Navy's main base in Scotland and is situated at Faslane at the top of the Gairloch. It is home to the Royal Navy's submarine fleet, including the UK's Trident nuclear missile submarines. The protesters said that they are demanding a future that is safe from the threat of nuclear weapons and environmental destruction. According to Extinction Rebellion, the action was part of the Peace Lotus campaign, a global day of anti-war resistance that celebrates the anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. A spokesman for the Faslane base has said that officers from the Ministry of Defence have been taking care of the protest with assistance from Police Scotland. Now, firstly, Paul, what's your response to these reports that Extinction Rebellion are beginning to protest on our streets once more?
I welcome it. This was a peaceful protest, and it's an issue that's very close to my heart. I joined the CND when I was 14-year-old. I remember doing a project on it at school, read about it, and couldn't believe that that was in the early 80s, and obviously that was at the time of the arms race. And I've been a member of the CND since 14, and this is a peaceful protest, so I very much support what they're planning to do. Nuclear weapons for me are abhorrent. The fact that they're all located in Scotland is abhorrent. And again, it's one of the main reasons why I joined the SNP and want us to be independent. We have the ability to remove these nuclear weapons, and the peaceful protests. And I know there are different views around about Extinction Rebellion, and you look back at times where things have changed in the world, and you looked back at Emmeline Pankhurst with the suffragettes, and they were seen as rebels, and it was terrible at the time. You've seen Rosa Parks with the bus boycott, and she was seen as a rebel, and it was terrible at the time. But they changed society massively, and I think all credit to the Extinction Rebellion in this regard. With a peaceful protest, and you go back to the days in Greenham Common when you had the protesters that were there. It raised awareness in the 80s around about the issues of nuclear weapons. So I support what they're doing. And other matters, as long as I think depending on some of the actions, I know they had actions against one of the banks the other day, and that's something you need to look at. But certainly in terms of what they've done at Faslane today, completely support it.
And Paul, what do you think will be done about the Royal Navy, the UK's nuclear fleet, if we are going to offer the safe green future that these young people are demonstrating and asking for?
I think that obviously the First Minister was asked about this, I think, either yesterday or the day before, and I think, she's been very committed to say that nuclear weapons need to be removed, and I know there would need to be discussions with the MOD, with NATO probably, around about the safe removal of that. But I think in independent Scotland we need to set a very clear timeline around about when nuclear weapons, would be removed from Scotland, and I think, you don't want to become independent for the sake of it. And the removal of nuclear weapons for me would be one of the massive benefits of being an independent country, is that, we set our own foreign policy. Having nuclear weapons on Scottish soil for me we can't accept that in an independent country. I know we just can't remove them the day after, but I think it's something that we'd have to set a very clear timeline on, and discussions with the UK government, NATO, and the MOD to do that. And I think obviously there's a jobs element of that as well. But Scotland would have its own conventional forces, which I think many would be able to transfer across to.
Of course. Thank you, Paul. Now, finally, and not very far from Faslane, the developers of Flamingo Land have been offered a 125-year lease at Loch Lomond. The Scottish Greens' Ross Greer has uncovered Scottish Government plans to offer Flamingo Land a 125-year lease on the West Riverside site at Balloch, should their controversial resort proposals receive planning permission. Greer has hailed this news as a partial victory for the Save Loch Lomond campaign and their efforts to keep the land in public hands. Mr. Greer has warned, however, that it is likely to be part of a plan from the developers and government to undermine the arguments used against their unsuccessful first attempt to build a luxury resort on the site. The change in land ownership plans came to light following a Freedom of Information request made by Greer's Parliamentary office. Despite heavy redactions, the documents do reveal that the latest agreement between Flamingo Land and the government agency Scottish Enterprise makes provision for a 125-year ground lease. Previous agreements between the government and developer proposed selling the site to Flamingo Land. A previous exclusivity agreement covering sale of the site came to an end in December 2020. It was replaced with this new agreement, despite over 10,000 people signing a petition from the Scottish Greens calling on the Scottish Government to end the arrangement. The Green Party's manifesto for Thursday's election commits to supporting a community buyout of the site as a matter of urgency. Now, Paul, what's your response to this news of the Scottish Government's latest dealings with the developers of the Flamingo Land resort?
Now, I think in terms of, I think there's a number of matters here. I think there's obviously planning policy, which needs to be looked at, and I think very much in an issue around about this, particularly in an area of Loch Lomond. I think the planning issues, I think need to be looked at around about that, and I think there needs to be consultation with the local community, very much so in that regard. And I know Scottish Government planning policy does mention around about the community consultation as part of any process, and I think that developers have to be very clear about that, and they have to be very clear about what they're proposing, and there has to be a detailed community consultation. And as part of Scottish planning policy, the developer then, if they submit an application, should be dealing with these issues that are there. So that needs to be transparent. And I think that's the main point that would come through for myself in that one, Andrew. And I think obviously Loch Lomond is a beautiful place, and any application that comes forward can't be seen to damage that. But the views of the local community, I think, for me, are paramount going ahead. And any Scottish Government dealings, again, I think should be open and transparent, both with the local council, with the planning authorities, and with the wider community itself.
As a co-developer or a promoter of this development, do you think that Scottish Enterprise listens to local people enough?
I think when it deals with that, I know there'll be some commercial sensitivities, for example, in some discussions that they may have with certain developers, not just this one we're talking about, but another issue. So I think there's obviously issues of commercial confidentiality, and as an organisation, Scottish Enterprise, I think, maybe needs to look at that. If it's developing its own policy and is investing monies, for example, into public monies, into developments, I think they need to consult with the local communities, because, for example, if they do invest the monies and the local communities against it, then, I think, and you're always going to get mixed opinions in applications like this, but there needs to be a full, I think, consultation process, not only from the applicant, but from Scottish Enterprise, if public money is being used. And as long as it's within the commercial sensitivities that may be part of any project that comes forward. So in my opinion, I think they need to listen a little bit more as they look at doing that. And I think that's in consultation with the local councils, for example, who may know their own communities a little bit more than Scottish Enterprise, for example.
And it struck me that there might be similarities here between the proposed development on Loch Lomond, which obviously is an iconic site, I suppose is how it would be described, and perhaps the development of the funicular railway up Cairngorm, which was another tourist-based development that was heavily promoted by an enterprise agency, although in that case HIE. Now we know that the funicular railway has run into difficulties and is currently not operating, and is looking at a multi-million-pound bill to fix it. Do you think that perhaps if planning permission for Flamingo land was granted, do you think that leasing the land rather than selling the land to the operators might allow Scottish Enterprise or others on Scottish Enterprise's behalf to keep closer to the operation of the development and to protect the investment of public money in these kind of operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously in this case, I think the devil would be in the detail. If you looked at that, where would the opportunities for a break of the lease and what would that entail? And you're right. I mean, if it's public monies that are invested, there needs to be that protection of the public monies. And again, taken back into the public consultation that we talked about, consultation with the council, if they do get planning permission, then I think there needs to be, without knowing the full details, obviously, of the lease, that there needs to be the devil's in the detail in terms of protecting that money that's been invested and how that could be returned in the event if the development itself doesn't succeed.
Thank you, Paul. And that is the news in Scotland at 7 this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You'll find the link to do that on the screen. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, thank you, Paul, for coming off the pavements of East Lothian and joining us this evening.
Andrew, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. I hope that you have a peaceful Friday evening and have a great weekend.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland Channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.